up YouTube, it's Clormo with another Logic Pro X tutorial talking about Alchemy. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about the inspector zone controls, which again, it's in that sources inspector window. And without further ado, just to get through it a little bit quicker and keep the momentum going, let's go right into Logic Pro. Just as a reminder, you need to be into one of the sources. We have been dealing with this same sample here, this grand plug, and in my example in this tutorial I have it on source D. You need to go to edit to bring the inspector window. We have covered the global controls, which are all of these guys. I've covered the group controls, and this is what I'm going to be focusing on today, the zone controls here. There's going to be a little bit of the key map editor sprinkled in there and a little bit of the sample edit, or the region edit, I should say. But mostly that's going to be actually tackled in the next few videos, but it's good because it overlaps a little bit and we'll get a good understanding of it. So let's go right away what we need to do. So we have here our parameters for the zone controls. The first one, aptly named zone, it has a plus sign. And what we do here is just bring the input browser. What do we need to know here? What I need to note about is that any newly imported sample is going to be added to the current configuration that you're carrying with your samples and everything in the inspector window. Each new sample is going to result in a new zone. Let's try that, and let's bring just a grand plug G1. It's going to take a few seconds to load, which is weird because it's just a stock sample. So there it is. So we have this new sample here. Our zones are filled out and everything, and we can see the name right there. We're gonna get to that in a second. To the right, we have a select MIDI button. If you turn it on, it will automatically select zones by you playing your MIDI keyboard. You can also do that if you bring your keyboard, you know, in Logic. All I did was press Command K, and there's my. So you see that when I pressed a key, it went back to the grand plug, and that's because I don't have defined this new sample as a zone. We're gonna get to that in a second. And now moving on, we have down here the zone name field is gonna show both of the samples. It's a pop-up that's gonna show whatever samples I have, and again, that's all tied to the key map editor, which is going to define the zones. And let's see, we'll move down here. Before we move, actually, I want to make a note is that the key map editor, again, this piano roll thing that we have, will let you select multiple zones simultaneously. If that's the case, if you set it up to have multiple zones at the same time, the zone name field will show here multiple, which will indicate that you have a selection with multiple zones and multiple samples. Any parameter that you change is going to be applied to all the zones that you have selected. We'll see more of that in the next video when we deal with the key map editor a little bit, or at least I want to show that like in a practical example. But for now, just keep that in mind, because if you start experimenting with it and all of a sudden you see multiple here, it's because of that. It's because you alter your key map editor zone settings to actually choose multiple zones or samples into one same parameter. Then now we do go into the key. Notice that I have here D5, and notice that the sample name that I have selected is D5 as well. If I change to G1, see how that changed. What does that mean? Well, that means here the key field, you can choose up or down any root key that you want to set for that zone to trigger it, to trigger that sample. But typically when you're setting the zone and you're going to the import browser, if you have a sample with a name that already has that key, which is usually what the Alchemy samples will do to make it easier, Alchemy is gonna quickly set the node key for you, the root key, to the appropriate node that you have. If you had a sample that's pitch, I would suggest that you make sure that you find the right root key when you're bringing it, so that way you don't get conflicts. However, having said all that, if you don't have a file name with a nice root key on it, what Alchemy is going to do in Logic is going to analyze and calculate the pitch of that sample and set the most appropriate root key that it thinks about. But you can set your own by moving here with the arrows, or you can also go to the Learn button, which is the next thing that I'm going to explain in a second. And also what that means is that the sample will play at its original pitch, right? Because it's matched to the right root key. That's why I say it's important to know that before you import it. So talking again about Learn, to set it up by yourself, what you do is when you press it, you will press then a key note in your MIDI, and whatever note you press is going to be set here. So what I'm going to do is going to bring my little keyboard again and press, let's see, let's go with one higher. See how it changed to B4? Oh, that's a good pun in there, right? B4 before D5. Anyway, so that's how it was set up. But obviously I can also drag, and once you have set your actual keynote with the Learn button, when you press a MIDI key, it turns off because the program Alchemy already learned the note. So he said, okay, so that's what you said, that's what I'm gonna do. Then moving to the right, there's this loop mode pop-up, and there's 4 different loop modes, or 5 if you count none, that you can set. None will simply ignore any looping altogether and will play the sound completely. That is tied to this region here. I'm gonna just show you real quick how you can set your loop region in a second. But to be able to actually access the loop region, you have to go to any of the other modes, like let's say continuous, right? So notice how I have now 2 yellowish markers. That's similar to like when you set a cycle region and all that. If you haven't noticed, Logic typically, anything that's looping and cycling will typically, and that's because at this version, I don't know if future versions it will change, but they set it as a yellow region that you can change. That gives you also the visual reference. With continuous, going back to here to the loop modes, it will loop continuously through the sound while a note is being held, and then during the release phase. So all that means is that I press a note and it will keep looping it going forward through the whole sound. Let's say this is my sample, right? And let's say I want to set this here, this start and end is just the start and end of the actual sample. I can also set that to whatever I want. And then these yellow guys, let's say that I want to say that my loop region is this. And the reason I'm setting it that short and so close is because my MIDI notes are, I have like a sustain note, but then I have a lot of quick melody notes in there. So I just want to make sure that it enters that loop region. So it's gonna do something like this. Let's just hit play. It's actually going a little bit faster than I thought. There you go. Notice as I open up the region, I don't even reach. You see the market, it doesn't even reach that far because of the notes that are being played. But if I set it up very close to where it is, just take one last listen there. It's like a strobing, but it's still playing the whole sample, right? Or, well, it's not really playing the whole sample because the sample, you can see it's already here. It's a little bit confusing because it's playing the notes, right? It still plays the melody with the intended effect of the sample on the melody, on the MIDI notes, but it's creating that effect as if I was pressing very fast on the different notes, right? Because I'm continuously going through it. So moving on with sustain, the loop will continuously go, right, while a note is being held, and it will exit the loop region to play the normal sound release phase. So that, what that's gonna do is just a little bit different to continuous. Notice that it does that little sound once, like it's trying to loop in here, but then the marker keeps going. As you enter the release phase, it will try to play the rest of outside. Actually, I would need to know or look, right? So the marker is stopping somewhere here, and if I go like that in my loop region, the marker is gonna try to reach that again. You see? Trying to get out to that phase when I enter the release, when I depress the note. So I guess this is not a great example to show that, but it still worked, and hope you understood it. But anyway, let's move it then to forward and back. It's just like continuous, but what this is going to do is just going to alternate forward and back in the loop region. So instead of going playing continuously forward, it's gonna go like boom boom boom. Let's try that, and let's just make it again very short. So that's pretty neat. It gives you, in essence, in this example, gives me a result as if I was filtering it in different ways, but just by editing the start and end points of the loop region and setting a zone, is going to give me that same effect quite easier. And now let's just move down here to these three guys. We have seen them before in many other tutorials, but we need to talk about them. So I have here a volume, a tune, and a panning. Yeah, you guessed it. The volume is just going to set the zone output level. The tuning, you can tune by semitones, so you can actually deviate from this. And this is why this is important. If you're detuning that sample that you have, let's just change to the other sample. And we know that our attack and release is very short here. So let's just set that there. So if I start tuning this guy in semitones, I just want to make sure that I change my keynote as well, so I don't get any discrepancies. It's just, again, I say the word discrepancy loosely because really it's your sound. You can do whatever you want, but if you're doing live playing and a live performance and you're setting your performance pads and all of the MIDI controls and all that stuff, you really would like to keep the root keys and the sample keys in sync so that you don't get lost and play something out of key, you know. So let's just take a quick listen to that. And it keeps going to, yeah, that's because I haven't really set the zone here for this guy, so it's just going, you see. We need to move. You just say that, okay? But I would need to, there you go. So I was a little bit lucky on my part. I did not really look at the notes here to make sure what part of the zones these notes were at. I just kind of knew based on what the settings of this loop was, so I kind of split them, and now I did start playing that. So anyway, that's just showing you I got a little bit distracted there, but just making sure that you understand what the tuning does. Then the panning is just going to set the balance of each of the zones, right? So now we have two zones, two distinctive zones, and notice how it's going to light up when they have one selected, and so on and so forth. So let's just keep going with this with the G1, and then let's go down here, and then you have here your low key field. high key field, low velocity field, and high velocity field. That's all tied to your key map editor. And they work pretty much in the same way, or you can edit them in the same way. Notice that if I go to the key editor, right, and I change, this is the zone for G1. If I change, you see how the low key changes, and if I change this, changes my high key. So yeah, you guessed it. What those mean is that the low key will set the lowest MIDI node that will trigger the zone, and you can go up and down, you can do whatever you want here, or as you can see, I can drag left that left edge and set the low key. If I do it for the right edge, I set the high key, and I can also drag the whole zone if you didn't notice that, so I can bring it back to where it was. The high key, I just explained it, right? It's gonna do just the opposite of the low. Now we have this too, the velocity, and you guessed it, what that's gonna do, it's just gonna act the same as these two guys, but it's going to be tied to the velocity range. So that's why you can go from 0 to 127. And you can also edit that here in the key map editor. If I go take the top, make it down, I will set the high velocity range. And if I go from down to top, I'm going to do that. So tying that into what I have here, and without knowing what I really have here, if I have notes that are inside that range, that I'm good. If I'm outside those ranges, then I'm not gonna be triggering the zone correctly because I have constrained it into a different zone. That's why this is really called zone. You're constraining in the key map editor how you're gonna trigger your groups and your samples per notes, velocity, envelopes, right? Because we're dealing here with a sample and we're kind of dealing with the envelope of it, and loop regions. Hopefully that gives you a broader understanding of the whole thing, but I'm gonna keep going. So below here, and there's a zone fade pop-up menu. This is 2 modes. The menu itself is gonna determine the method that you're gonna use to fade overlapping zones at the boundaries that you have set for key and velocity. So this is just setting the fade based on the zones. Right now I have an overlapping zone, but I could, right? I can do that, and I can then check in those notes that I have here, thinking that I already set my keys correctly. Then the zones will be triggered, and they will be fade based on the mode for the zone fade, and then this guy's down here, but gonna get to those in a minute. We also can do is that, or what we also need to know is that no more than 2 zones can be triggered simultaneously within one group. What all that means is that crossfades can be set for zones with adjacent key ranges, obviously, because you can see it there graphically. I have overlapping keys, or for zones with adjacent velocity ranges, which is obvious too. If you're overlapping keys, you're probably gonna be overlapping zone ranges, unless I will take, even if I take this guy and make it inside, then I will have overlapping zone ranges, unless this is not overlapping at all, like over here. So in summary, you can do all of that, but you cannot do it for both at the same time. You cannot do it for key and velocity at the same time. You need to define that by one of these. So the linear, what linear is going to do is going to create a linear ramp from full amplitude to 0. That is usually going to result in a crossfade that sounds a little bit quiet at the halfway point of the sample. And that's why it can be useful when you're crossfading 2 very similar sounds that may reinforce one another or may boost one another at the midway point, or they have like an equal power crossfading there. If I were to choose power, then you truly create an equal power curve fade, which is usable for almost anything, because you're just creating a curve fade that's equal in power. So when you're crossfading two sounds that have similar loudness, then this mode will give you a smoother fade, and it will give the impression that there's the same apparent loudness at the halfway point. So this is good for most sounds, and typically I would think that if you are experimenting with this, you will probably experiment with power in the beginning, so that you can tell from each one. I'm not gonna go through the whole business again of combining this into one zone, because I want to see that in the next video with some examples, but you get the idea, right? You see my velocity here. I just wanted to show you this. I press play, so I'm not triggering anything. Now I'm triggering, and I'm triggering the power because I'm inside there. So this is very good. And again, I keep comparing it to the ESX24. This is another reason to compare it and make sure that you understand why it's much better and more powerful. You have a lot of graphical representation of what's happening in what you're changing and your notes and all that. So it's pretty good because, excuse me, if you're not sure about what's happening and you just started to create stuff going up and down and didn't pay attention, you don't really have to go back here, because you can see what's going on and then attack your zones based on that. So that's pretty good, pretty powerful. So now let's just move to this last four right here, and if you guessed it, then you're right. They're tied to the low, high, key, and velocity ranges that are being set here before your fade. So going from here, from left to right, left field is gonna set the range of the fade for the left edge of the zone, and that's relative to your low key parameter. So let's say that if I were to set this in C2 and then I set my left to 12, you have 12 notes between C2 and C3. So my zone is gonna fade in gradually for any note that have a pitch between C2 and C3, right? Because you have 12 in there. You can count them if you don't believe me, but that's just some music theory stuff, right? Then right, what right is gonna do, right field, it's similar but opposite to left. And what that means is that you're adjusting relative to the high key, right? So you're adjusting relative to this area, to the right side. And instead of a fade in, you will have a fade out, but it's pretty much the same as the left field. Then let's see, we go to the bottom right, and again, if you should have caught the gist of it, it's tied to the velocity, these two here. So the bottom is tied to the low velocity, top is tied to the high velocity. Again, key map editor, I can go up, down. So bottom will be this, up will be this in the field, but then I will need to tell it what velocity I want there. And this is it's a shame that I wanna drag it, doesn't let me, but by the time I get to where I want it to go, it's gonna give me it's just better to set there and just type it here. But it's a shame because I cannot type here and the dragging is not working, but you should be able to drag up and down here. But anyway, the bottom field is going to set the range of the fade for the lower edge relative to low velocity parameter, like I said. But a practical example here would be that if your low velocity is set to 20, for example, and your bottom is set to 15, this parameter here, then the zone will fade in gradually for notes that have a velocity between 20 and 35. The 15 is that that fade in range, right? So I'm saying you're gonna go 15 velocities or velocity magnitudes as a fade. So anything between that will will fade in. Anything below that, 20, that I hypothetically say here, that you can put, right? I have 24 right now, but let's say I make it 20. Anything below that is not going to trigger the zone. So we're going to test that just in a minute. For the top, similar but opposite. It's a fade out, and it's relative to the high velocity parameter. So let's say this was set to 90, but I already know that my notes are not over there, right? I saw them over here, more in the 110-ish. But if I set that to 90 and my top is set to something like 30, God, I wish that drag worked. The zone will fade out gradually for notes that have velocities between 60 and 90, because I'm giving it that range, right? I'm saying the high velocity is 90 and you have a fade out range of 30. Simple as that. Anything that's above 90 will not trigger the zone. And let me just hit play, because I know that I have this zone has a lot of velocities over there, but I'm going to move this zone here because I want to make sure that I'm overlapping a little bit. So let's play that. And let me just go with continuous. Change the parameters for, so I'm just pressing one note, should overlap a little bit more. You see how the graphic changes, right? It's triggering each zone as it enters the zone. So that's the basic idea of setting zones, and then setting the ranges and all that good stuff, either here or in the key map editor, and also setting your loop ranges down here. But anyway, we're going to talk about the key map editor in a little bit more detail in the next video. Should be a quicker video too, but it will only be related to the key map editor. And actually, I'm just going to save this because I want to continue from here, make it a little bit more practical. So with that, I'm going to leave you for this video. Thanks again to everybody that has subscribed recently. A lot of new subscribers, a lot of comments, a lot of thank yous and requests. I hear you. Some of the requests, like there's one in particular that I remember very vividly, just because it was not only the last one, but it actually tied to what I really want to do. It's suggesting making like a sound design workshop, and to be honest with you, that's what I want to go with this. So after I finish with Alchemy, which I think a lot of you should be using more than some of the other synths, then I will go into that, just creating some more practical example videos, and okay, how can you create this sort of sound or this sort of effect. And then I'm probably gonna bounce back into some of the other synths and try to do a similar thing, just to give a little bit more of that practical type of tutorial, which is very useful, and you're probably gonna appreciate it a lot more than just let's go into synth and put presets on, right? Still, you can experiment on your own, and it's all good stuff. So again, thanks a lot for that. One quick note that I want to make before I close the video is that if you've noticed, I launched a new look. If you were to go to my webpage, although not many people go to all the webpage stuff, they typically go to the bit store and sometimes just leave quickly. You may notice that there's part of the new look in there, but I need to make a few other updates, and I want to make sure that nothing gets screwed up. So by the time I go to the next video, if you try to enter to my webpage for any reason to download free beats or buy a beat, or anything, you're gonna see an under construction page more than likely, because I want to make sure that I don't screw anything up while I finish uploading the look and some of the settings, changing a little bit of the stuff in the big store. I'm gonna go back into the model of offering more licenses and having everything stored in there. So I'm just making that note just to make sure that if you go in there and you see an under construction, please don't take it the wrong way. Or if you notify me, thank you, but it's gonna be okay. It's gonna be normal, I am aware, and it's just gonna be because I'll be working on the page. Okay, so I'll see you in the next video. If this is the first time that you are watching one of my videos, make sure that you follow me on all the other social media stuff. It's in the border of the video at the very bottom, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, YouTube.